Thank you for doing this and taking the time to talk to all of us. My question for you is if things had gone in a different order, would you have remained, if the opportunity were here, to stay in Philadelphia as the OC, or did you have to ultimately move on anyway because you were in Minnesota, you were the designer, the installer, you were the play caller?
Kevin, that's an awesome question. Yeah, I appreciate it. If Josh McDaniels had become the head coach of the Colts and I had an opportunity to stay with the Eagles, I would have stayed 100%. I'm from Philadelphia. I love it there. It's my favorite place I've ever lived. I loved it there.
I'm not crying over spilled milk, Kevin, by any means. I've been very fortunate. I've had the opportunity to call plays for 3 different teams and been around a lot of good coaches and a lot of good players. Won a Super Bowl. I mean, in my hometown. I mean, how many people get to say that?
Do you think that's a part of the system in Philadelphia to some degree, since you were kind of in there and kind of worked in other places as well? But it also kind of seems like maybe that they just don't like taking layups.
And one thing Dio, I don't ever do. I'll talk about both players, how I see them. I'll never do player comparisons because that's not fair because each team is different, each situation is different. So that's one thing I swore I don't do player comparisons. But I'll talk about how I saw both guys, and especially with Carson. Um, Carson had that killer instinct in him. It was innately in his. That was his makeup. That was his DNA. Okay, and that's part of the reason we liked him. At least I did as much as I did. I can only speak for myself. And I liked that killer instinct. I think you can. I would much rather try to get a guy to take the pedal off a little bit than to get him to press the pedal. I do think that is a Philly trait, an Eagles trait. I think with those receivers and the tight end, I think they want to take their shots down the field. Are there times where you could check the ball down and those things? Sure. And I'm sure that's being brought up in those meetings as it was in ours. But at the same time, there's two things I really believe in. Number one, you can't take a quarterback's athleticism away from him ever. I like the aggressiveness. Are there times they could probably check the ball down? Yes. But I would much rather have those guys wired that way than the other way.
So what are some things that would maybe surprise us that you think are important in the roles that you've been in?
The detail of what you do and the amount of preparation and detail that goes into a weekly game plan is it's pretty deep. The game within the game, it's just so detailed. And I mean, every drawing has to be perfect. Every run drawing has to be perfect. Like you can't, it just has to be perfect. The other thing is the lack of sleep. Like you have to learn how to sleep, something simple. You have to learn how to sleep everywhere. You have to learn to sleep on the plane. You have to learn to sleep on the bus. You have to learn, I mean, anytime you can grab 15 minutes from the airport or from the facility to the airport, like you grab a 15-minute cat nap if you can.
What's the best part about being a coach at the NFL level?
The relationships with the players. That's the best part. It's just it's just going to sound really simple, Travis, but it is. I enjoy watching players get better. I just do. I enjoy something that you brought up in a meeting. We always talk about taking things from the meeting room to the field. That's one thing we always like. Can this guy take things from the meeting room to the field? And when you see that a guy takes something from the meeting room to the field, it gets you going, man. If that doesn't get you going, like I don't know what does. I really don't. What are you in it for?
Thanks for your part in our first Super Bowl ever. When you started building your offense, was it something that you had like a base from what you got from like as a player and just coaching, or did you have in your mind like, well, I would want it to look this way?
Awesome question, man. You guys are killing it tonight. Everything, Eddie, okay, is based on what your quarterback does well. So you have to have whatever you're building an offense, you have to have enough bullets in your gun to have 10 to 15 staples. Okay, this is what when the crap is hitting the fan and we've been 2, 3 and outs in a row. Hey, let's go back to training camp day one, and this is what we're really good at. Okay, and just all coverage beater. We could find a completion to get the quarterback back on track. All right. So you find out what those staples are early. All right. And you go from there. But it's all based around what the quarterback does well. So when I was a coordinator, if a coach brought a new concept to me that I had never run before, but I kind of liked, I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. I like kind of like that. I can see the reasoning for that. The first question would ask is, okay, who's running what? If, I take my time in Minnesota, if Adam Thielen doesn't run an outbreaker, well, we're not going to put him on an outbreaker. The NFL season is a 17 chapter book, and each chapter is different. You can't play every game the same. And so you have to tailor your game plan. Also, have to have enough bullets in your gun to tailor your game plan to who you're playing. So it starts early, obviously, when the coaches get there and you install your base offense. But there's so many cool things you can do off your base offense to fit the mold of your team.
Been a fan of yours for years, and I can't
Appreciate it.
thank you enough for the Super Bowl championship. With the slow starts in the first quarter and the first half that the Eagles have had, how hard would you go back and look at those first 15 scripted plays?
I know those guys are working hard at starting faster. You got to look at that hard. And that's an old coach once told me, you got to spend three of your 100% of time throughout the week. You spend 75% on the opponent and 25% on yourself. And like you have to look in the mirror and say, okay, where are we deficient right now? And you have to fix it, or at least attempt to fix it. It's going to come back and bite them in the butt if they're not careful. It would any team, not just the Eagles. I mean, you have to part of that momentum in the game, and it's just what it is. And you have to spend time on yourself. And it's funny, the first 15, like there's some guys that like over the course of time, like I don't even want to know.
Once you got your guy, you drafted him and you bring him in-house, how do you acclimate him to the NFL game? Do you start him off with what he ran in college to kind of get him up to speed, or are you just run my NFL routes?
He has to learn how to run the NFL routes. Okay, he has to know how to, like in a lot of these colleges, Nish, as you know, a lot of these guys want to line up on the right or left side, and they look to the sideline and they signal what their route is. You know what I mean? And it just doesn't work that way in the NFL. You have to line up, everywhere. And the best teams, the best receivers can line up in all three spots. You can line up inside or outside. To get back to your first part of your question, yes, there are certain traits you look for in your X receiver, which is usually into the boundary in a 3-by-1 formation by himself. You usually look for a little bit bigger body that can win a one-on-one matchup, that can win on a slant. I will say this, Nish, about receivers. If you can't win on a slant versus press man, you cannot play in the NFL. You can't play in pro football if you cannot run a slant against press man. It's that simple. That's the day one install route. When it's 3rd and 6 and 3rd and 8, and that ball should be caught at 9 yards out of the shotgun on a slant at the inside edge of the numbers, right? You have to be able to win. Have to. So if you can't run a slant against press man, that's the first thing I looked at when I was a coordinator and watching receivers. I'd always tell the receiver coach, can he win on a slant versus press? And unfortunately, in college football, a lot of teams don't play press coverage, but you have to be able to win on a slant. But you got to get those guys acclimated out there.
When you were in Chicago, Nick Foles comes back to Chicago. You try to recreate essentially what we were doing here in Philadelphia.
I've had 2 Tri-City players. Okay, I call them Tri-City players. Okay, Terrell Pryor was with me in Oakland, Cleveland, and Jacksonville. Okay, and then Nick was with me. Okay, all right. So I've had 2 Tri-City players. And I'm going to back up your question a little bit to my time with Nick in Jacksonville. He threw an absolute dime, play 11 of the opening of the game of the season, right? And for a 35-yard touchdown pass to DJ Chark, and breaks his collarbone. Okay, the 11th play of the year, and he had an unbelievable spring. Our offense was rolling. I mean, oh yeah, and that's when the whole Minshew mania thing started. Okay. Then Minshew comes in and completes 21 of his first 22 passes. And then, Nick comes with us to Chicago. But to answer your question, Nick likes what he likes in a good way, and if you call things that Nick likes, he's going to execute it. All right. And so, yes, we did put some concepts in that Nick did like. Yes, absolutely. And we would have been, in my opinion, it would have been foolish not to, and we did. And I mean, Nick went out and won us a game in the snow in Seattle.